Today I'm going to talk to you about Roman history and politics. So to get started, we're going to do a brief overview of the history of the Roman government and the three major periods and what each of them consisted of. The first of which was the Roman Kingdom, which started in 753 BC and went to 509 BC. It was followed then by the Roman Republic, which began and replaced the Roman Kingdom in 509 BC and went until 27 BC-ish, 44 BC, somewhere in there. And then the Roman Empire, which began in 27 BC and went all the way in some form or another until 1453 AD. So we'll start with the Roman Kingdom. It was a monarchy. Its capital was Rome, and it was founded in 753 BC along the Tiber River on the top of a hill. This gave the hill looked out over a very fertile plain, which allowed for crops and food supply, but was also easily defendable from the hill and was along a river. So it was really like a very opportune location for a city. It was founded by Romulus and his brother Remus. They were twin brothers. Romulus and Remus had a disagreement on where Rome should be founded, so the story goes, and they basically decided to convene by reading signs from the gods via birds, and so they each went out separate from each other. Remus came back having only seen 6 vultures. Romulus, it is said, came back having seen 12. And in this disagreement, Romulus ends up killing Remus over naming the city, and Romulus is the victor, and so it is named Rome. Romulus, by de facto, then is the first king to rule over the people. All future kings after that are elected by the people, and they serve lifelong terms. The Roman king was really in command of every aspect of Rome, from military to religion to the judicial trials and all executive power ultimately. The king appointed a lot of officials to main offices, and they served under the king for his reign, which was his entire life, and then they were disposed of and replaced with the new king's elections to offices. Two of in particular, of the positions that the king appointed were the Tribunus Cererum, which was in charge of the king's bodyguard, and also led one of the 3 tribes, the Ramnes tribe. And then the other was the Prefectus Urbae, which is basically the king's stand-in while the king was away. That appointed person held all power in the same effect as the king while the king was away. He had imperium over the entire city when he was in the city, and was a very powerful role. The Senate, which is the other one, I guess you could call it a governing body, but really the king was all the power. The Senate consisted of 300 citizens, 100 from each tribe, the Ramnes, the Tities, and the Luceres. Tities. The Senate in the Roman Kingdom did not have any real power. They could not call their own meetings. The king had to call them into meeting. They couldn't. A lot of the stuff is fuzzy because most of the history of the Roman Kingdom was lost after it was sacked, but they also couldn't really bring laws or items to be covered. The king brought those. So the Senate of 300 really just served as advisors to the king. The king made all the decisions and could ultimately ignore what it was that the Senate had told him to, that he should do, or that they thought was right. And really, they don't have any true power until there is a loss of king through death, in which then they serve as the main power during that death, and they also are the body which brings in the new king. In that process, they elect what is called an interrex, which is an individual from the Senate, which is appointed for 5 days. And in that 5 days, they have to make a nomination. That person has to make a nomination. If they fail to make that nomination after the 5 days, then they have to appoint another interrex, and that person then has to make a nomination or appoint, and that so on and so forth down the chain. Once the interrex makes a nomination, then that nomination goes before the Senate, and the Senate then approves or rejects it. If the Senate approves it, the nomination then moves on to the curate assembly, and they would convene on the nomination. If they vote to accept, then the final voting time for that nominated king is put before the citizens of Rome. The citizens of Rome can choose to nominate or not nominate, and ultimately they are the ones with the true yes-no power in the end of whether the king will come on. The king could not, if the citizens voted to go through with the nominated king, he doesn't take office immediately. Because he serves as a religious and a political person, he has to go through 2 acts. The first being the religious aspect of office, and then the second being imperium, which is complete power. And so he puts a motion before the curate assembly and the Senate to approve his power of imperium, and then they would vote yes or no. And that ultimately, after that vote of yes or no, the king takes power. In the last king of the Roman kingdom was not trusted, and ultimately was ousted because of a rape, to which the woman then committed suicide. So that king was pulled from power, and rather than bring a new king in, they just choose to move on with the Senate, and that is really the start of the Roman Republic. So in 509 BC, the Roman Republic replaces the Roman Kingdom and is led by 2 councils, which are elected annually by the citizens. And they start with this election of 2 councils, and they really seek to have an evenness with the people in power. So as it kind of goes along, they develop a more and more complex constitution, and a really large separation of power with checks and balances throughout. Through these checks and balances and this evolution of the Constitution, they really lay the groundwork for dealing with problems by an elected body, and evenly distributing that power through rules and separation, which is the basis of a lot of republics of today. Namely, like the U.S. is very similar in its balance of power and its separation with checks and balances. So the Roman Republic was a hierarchical society, and there was a lot of struggle between the 2 groups. The patricians were landowning aristocracy, and they were the original people of power from the Roman kingdom. And they started with the most political power. And then the plebeians were the common citizens and the largest in number, and throughout the history of the Republic gained more and more power, and eventually a lot of the main families of the plebeians are brought into the aristocracy, leading into what will be the Roman Empire. The Roman Republic developed a really strong tradition of and morality, and it required public service and had a strong military kind of attack and win battles and then have times of peace. This led to a massive expansion of Rome and the conquest and annexing of many of the surrounding regions. Toward the end, there were many civil wars breaking out due to small numbers of the Roman leaders not agreeing and alliances not lasting very long. And so these small groups of power of families didn't have a lot of cohesion. And ultimately, Augustus comes in after one of the final civil wars breaks out and reforms the Republic into a principate, taking most of the power and putting it into himself. As principate, he appoints himself as the princeps, or the first citizen, and he continues to use that term for himself as citizen. He doesn't call himself a ruler. He tries to kind of, not necessarily hide behind the process, but use the process of the Republic and the Senate, and then hold the ultimate power for himself. So he really oversees most of the really important aspects of power. He makes the ultimate decisions in most things, while continuing the Senate's annual elections, and they still meet, they still vote, they still do all their things. It's just Augustus kind of sits over top and makes sure it is what he thinks is right. And he really begins the transition from the Roman Republic into the Roman Empire. He kind of is the first emperor, so to speak. And so that brings us into the Roman Empire, which is an autocratic government. And there's some really fuzziness on when it starts. A lot, it really does kind of begin with Octavian, who is then called Augustus, in around 27 BC. But then most historians really look at Julius Caesar's appointment as the perpetual dictator in 44 BC as the marked point of when the Roman Empire starts. From that start, the Roman Empire does a wonderful job of having, 2 whole centuries of peace and prosperity, the Golden Age, excuse me, and ultimately it is very strong. Any uprisings that come up throughout their massive scope of power at this point are put down brutally and quickly. And it really reaches a very large total area, the largest of the three eras, and is also the longest of the 3 types of government to last. In some form or another, through many civil wars and breaking ups and bad leaders and whatever, it lasts in some form or another 1,400 years, which is amazing. But so the Golden Age and the 2 centuries of peace really serve to help expand the empire and annex, more and more and more land and other governments into it. Due to this massive annexing, the surrounding areas kind of take on this Roman culture, and it really serves as like a base for most of future Europe and the Mediterranean, Northern Africa. The scope at which Rome influences future governments is just huge. The 3rd century, or when things start to really kind of turn negative, it survives a very strong crisis, which, there's unrest, there's plague, there's lack of resources, bad leaders, but it does make it through and then splits into two sections, east and west, each having their own leader and their own capital. Rome and Constantinople become the two capitals of Rome, the east and the west. And that kind of goes for a while. And the 4th and 5th century see a lot of civil unrest in all the areas. It basically has spread itself way too thin. It can't hold itself up with its resources, and eventually is finally invaded, and the western half falls in 476 BC. And then the eastern half continues. We know it now as the Byzantine Empire, but at the time it was still called the Roman Empire and a host of other names by the people. And so it really is it's counted as still being, the eastern half of the Byzantine Empire is really still counted as being part of the Roman Empire, since it's kind of born from it. And that continues all the way up until 1453, and then they fall to the invasion of the Ottoman Empire, which ultimately is the end of